begin this morning with the passage of a supplementary budget of $982 billion for the 2021 fiscal year by Nigeria's Senate. The figure represents an increase from about $87 billion against the $895 billion proposed by President Muhammadu Buhari. The approval follows the consideration of the report of the Senate Committee on Appropriations presented by the chairman, Baru Jibrin. President Buhari had on June 22nd transmitted a supplementary appropriation bill requesting the amount to be used to fund the purchase of armaments for the military and the funds to support COVID-19 vaccine program, among other issues.
The committee, in line with the harmonized position with its House of Representatives counterpart, is recommending funding stroke an upward review of the funding of some security agencies that were grossly underfunded or not funded in the supplementary appropriation bill, like the Nigerian Navy, the Ministry of Police Affairs, Defense Intelligence Agency, Department of State Security Services, and Economic and Financial Crimes Commission.
This supplementary budget is targeted at addressing the security challenges in this country and, of course, the procurement, administration, and management of the COVID-19 vaccines. We expect our committees, the relevant committees, to be stiff, to be alive to their responsibilities for oversighting on how these funds will be deployed prudently.
And still on the Senate, the upper legislative chamber has approved the foreign borrowing of 2.3 trillion naira, that's $6.1 billion US dollars, to enable the federal government fund the deficit component of the 2021 national budget. Chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign and Local Debt, Senator Clifford Odia, while presenting the budget of the committee, says it is not a new borrowing as the deficit is captured in the 2021 Appropriations Act. He also says the loan will be obtained from multilateral, bilateral and international capital market sources.
The Senate directs the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, the Director General of Debt Management Office, and the Governor of Central Bank of Nigeria to submit to the National Assembly within 10 working days, excluding the day of close of trading, a letter containing the United States dollars amount so raised and received as a result of the above approval, together with the applicable exchange rates.
This is not a new loan. This is a borrowing plan that we approved before with the budget 2021. What we have done is simply to provide the resolutions, the necessary resolutions that will enable the government to go and borrow.
All right, for the conversation, Dr. Abati.
Well, first and foremost, yes, it is normal for government to send supplementary budget. But when you send a supplementary budget, the question to ask is, how do you cash back it? Even the normal budget, there are issues in terms of cash backing. Now, in this particular instance, we've been told that, well, first, there is a concern about COVID-19. Yes, that is true. We need more vaccines. We need more intervention in terms of how we provide the wherewithal to combat COVID-19, particularly at a time when people are talking about a possible third wave in Africa. That's from the Dr. Moeti, the representative of the WHO in Africa, from Dr. John Inkegason, the man in charge of the AU project in Africa. So we need revenue, true, with regard to COVID-19. We also need revenue with regard to security. And it was on the basis of this that the supplementary budget had increased the proposition from the federal government by over 89 billion. But one, where will the money come from? Nigeria has a revenue problem. So the second leg of it is related. And that's the point they are making about, okay, the National Assembly has approved borrowing, multilateral borrowing from the Bretton Woods institutions. What is the guarantee that that money will be provided? If that money is provided to fund all of this, as proposed, then of course it imposes a greater debt burden on Nigeria. At the moment, we have a debt burden that many people have complained about. And the third leg of it has to do with, okay, when we get this money, where is the guarantee with regard to, one, accountability, efficiency, service delivery? So these are issues that Nigerians need to worry about, beyond all these concerns about, okay, we need more money to fund security, to fund COVID-19. So these are some of the questions, in my view, that we think we need to raise. External loan of over $6 billion. That's a lot.
Colossal. The
people who make the argument that, look, Nigeria is putting itself in a situation whereby it will, generations, future generations, will have, their future will have been mortgaged, and they will have been, put in a situation where they will pay loans. That's a problem. So how can we do good governance in Nigeria to ensure that the budget that we propose can be cash-backed from the perspective of internal creativity, internal productivity, good governance within the environment itself? I think that these are the fundamental issues that we should talk about. We can't keep borrowing. Okay, keep borrowing. You collect money from here, you collect money from there. But you will have to pay at some point.
I mean, the formative word here, Tunde, you've got views on this?
Well, I think I've made those views very clear several times. I'm always really nervous about our debt profile. Okay, but I guess the only thing I'll add to what Dr. Abati said is that the Minister of Finance, since we're going to be discussing the former Minister of Finance later, let me talk about the current one, Zainab Ahmed, addressed the concerns of Nigerians with regards to debt-to-revenue ratio. She said it's currently at 43%. It's been as high as 85% in 2020, and it was 58% in 2019. So what we're seeing now is a significant improvement. And she said that deliberately to address concerns that Nigerians have, which I want to highlight as a really important part of democracy. How are you a member of the cabinet and you are not accountable to the public, and you do not go out of your way to specifically address fears? Whether or not we're convinced is entirely different, but the fact that she at least made that attempt, she acknowledges the criticisms that exist about our debt profile. I think that's important.
A very important insight, but most importantly, is it safe to say he that goes a borrowing goes a what?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
But the other thing to note is that even in the 2022 budget, because we're told that the budget for 2022 work has started, even that 2022 budget is going to be a deficit budget.
Yeah, 5.6.
5.6 trillion.
Already on ground.
Budget deficit.
On ground.
So Nigeria keeps moving from deficit to deficit. Okay, economists will say it's not a problem to have a budget deficit. After all, the United States has the largest budget deficit in the world. Okay, they make that argument. But how does it translate to ordinary people like us? Yeah. People like us who have to go up and down, pay NEPA bills, criminal bills for electricity, criminal VAT, and all of that. That's the residual point that we will need to address at some stage.
Great point. And for all those that make that argument, Dr. Abati, just point them over to Zambia and see what deficits do. We'll take a short break now.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotas Adiri is here to give us an African business update. Good morning, Rotas.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers. African Business Update's all about budgets and debts. As I believe you've already spoken about, the National Assembly supplementary budget for fiscal year 2021 has been increased from 895 billion to 982 billion, so some extras added in there. Also, the Senate, as part of what was approved at the legislative level, the Senate has approved President Buhari's $6.1 billion, 2.4 trillion naira supplementary additional borrowing request. This is, of course, for external borrowing. Senate President Ahmed Lawan made it clear that this isn't new. This was already accounted for in the Appropriation Act. Nigeria is going to be sourcing for these funds from Euro bonds, essentially. We'll get to Ethiopia in a second because rates are kind of climbing, if inflation is going up, and certain central banks around the world are looking at raising rates, so Eurobond markets could be responding to that. So that means that dollar debts could get more expensive. Speaking of which, the Senate has asked Senator Clifford Odia, who is the head of the Committee on Foreign Borrowings, has asked the heads of the Ministry of Finance, Debt Management Office, Central Bank, I believe in 10 days to provide a document showing exactly what the exchange rate is going to be and what the total cost is going to be for dollar debt. Speaking of debt, I think we should take a look at a little chart here from the Debt Management Office, just as a refresher, looking at as of March 31st, 2021, total amount of total debt for Nigeria. So you're looking at about, you take, the states, the federal government, add everything together, about 33 trillion naira, about 85 or 86 or so billion dollars. So again, that's as of March 31st. We've already discussed debts earlier this week. Between January and May, 98% of income going towards debt servicing. More borrowing is being done. At this point, Nigeria isn't alone here, right? With the COVID pandemic, record amounts of fiscal expenditure on supporting economies and getting them to resuscitate themselves has meant that a lot of countries have been borrowing, and so essentially it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Essentially, with only less than 2 years to go with this administration, it's the next administration that has to worry about this. There's also the Ways and Means extension from the central bank to the federal government that is being turned into a 30-year loan. Which supposedly is going to be paid off. So that's 30-year security, an IOU. So the debt picture is still quite large. Moving on from that, we had on the Global Business Reports an interview with Bismarck Rwani, Managing Director of Financial Derivatives Company Limited, member of President Buhari's Economic Advisory Council. FDC believes that inflation could actually, for June, could go back to 18%. And, this rested on food. It also rested on exchange rates, pass-through effects. We're having a tariff review for electricity this month. I believe there should be an FDC outlook for, as far as the inflation projection is concerned, where they have some touch points, pressure points that could see inflation go back to 18%. So, because it's interesting, I believe Zainab Ahmed, when she was making a budget presentation last Thursday or Friday, she did make reference to the fact that inflation was decelerating. That might be temporary with what FDC is looking at here. And then we get to Ethiopia. I mentioned debt earlier. Ethiopia is looking to restructure about $1 billion in borrowings. I think the moratorium, they want to increase the moratorium to about 5-6 years to give them more time to pay it back. Ethiopia is one of the countries that is going to the G20 that is seeking debt relief, or maybe a marginal haircut in order for them to be able to pay back what they owe. But they need more room to be able to attend to fiscal issues over in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is second largest economy, second largest African country by population after Nigeria, about 115 million people. Interesting enough, the IMF, and this kind of struck me as interesting, and other analysts, the IMF urged Ethiopia to set up a credit committee that is going to review essentially their borrowing outlook for the year, going forward, which I thought the country already had, as part of its economic team. So the IMF is saying, hey, look, as far as what you need going forward in terms of debt relief and so on and so forth, set up a credit committee that's going to review these things before coming to us and other bodies for debt relief. That is essentially our African business update for today.
Right. Many insights there. Rosus, we can't talk about debt enough, and we need to look at this critically for ourselves in this country. The truth is, do we really need to have this big budget we're having that we have to use a deficit to fund? Because most of this money, the argument is they still fritter away due to corruption. So do we really need to have this big budget? If we really want to have that fiscal discipline, can't we start by cutting our court according to our size? Is it really tenable to have an over 11 trillion budget? Is that the case? Do we have the money? No, because we keep racking up deficits. Before next year even starts, for 2022 budget, we have a deficit already 5.6 trillion. And we keep racking up all of these loans, and we still take more in the middle of all of that. And the fact is, we know the problems. Goes back to the Orosanye report. We need to reduce cost of governance. We need to free a lot of money to be able to get more money into capital expenditure. What do budgets do? Fund capital expenditure. Most of the capital expenditure, we're still taking out loans on them. Most of the rail infrastructure we've done, one way or the other, we've taken out loans on them. Let's ask ourselves critical question. And that's why you're not surprised where inflation goes down a bit, now it's coming up again. The impact is there. Security crisis impacting food and logistics.
Well, Rotus, very quickly, you quoted...
if you look at the, just really quick, I have to throw this in. The, what was spent January through May, 1.8 trillion, right, in income is what we spent on, well, income was 1.84 trillion. What we spent on debt servicing was 1.8. Personnel costs, since Rufai mentioned this, what was that figure? 1.5 trillion. Personnel costs for January through May for Nigeria was 1.5 trillion naira. So, yeah, it's quite heavy.
Yeah, you quoted Bismarck Rewane. Bismarck Rewane knows his subject. And if he raises an alarm, I think he should be taken seriously. He's not just one of the leading economists, he's also a member of the Presidential Advisory Council. And I hope that the wisdom that he has provided about the risks ahead, he will also make available to the presidential body that he belongs to. However, there was a question I've been meaning to ask you. After the conclusion of the meeting of the OPEC Plus, where at the end of the day, because of the veto power exercised by the United Arab Emirates, they couldn't take a decision on production cuts or supply in relation to demand and all of that. Now, but despite that, oil prices, spot price, has been going up. Although there's volatility, there's uncertainty, and here we are. About a month ago, we were told by the GMD of NNPC that the safe zone for us is $58 to $60. And now we are above $70 with Brent crude, even with WTI, the Western Texas Intermediate. And before the end of the year, the experts tell us we could reach $80. And all of a sudden, it looks like more money from the international crude oil market is a problem for Nigeria. How do we deal with this? And what are the issues that need to be addressed? A country will make more money and the country say, no, we don't need more money. A country that has a revenue problem, a foreign exchange crisis, a foreign reserve chaos. I'm sure you will be able to help us. You are the expert.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you would think that with prices of crude rising, we would be able to make more money. But there have been cuts, production cuts that have been put in place that have restricted our ability to produce more barrels of oil. Think of anything that you sell. You have to have volume. Volume times price gives you sales. So if your volume is restricted and you can't produce above a certain amount, then as the price goes up, you're not able to capitalize on that. So that's one, is the OPEC cuts. Two, it's the subsidy. I mean, the subsidy, as Obele Kyari has been ringing this bell now for a long time. As oil price, he says it's a double-edged sword. As oil prices rise, yeah, you make more revenue, but also what you're paying for the under recovery, which is the difference between the pump price and what the actual price is, and Bismarck Rewane touched on this yesterday when we spoke to him, is that increases how much you have to pay, which is why the NNPC has not been able to remit as much to FAC and so on. So those are the two primary reasons that Nigeria has not been able to capitalize on rising oil prices.
What do we do about it? What do we do about it? That's the question. I know all the story about subsidy.
Doctor, 900 billion naira has been appropriated for subsidy in 2021. 900 billion. You could pick your Boston Omofaya on Arise Exchange. He had two members of the World Bank on his show, and they told him pick whatever cause you want to address in Nigeria. What can 900 billion naira do to address that? How many states, Doctor, you brought this up last time, earlier on this week or last week. Only about 6 states in Nigeria can pay pensions. 6, right? So if the other states are struggling with pensions, how much would 900 billion go towards being able to make them pay for afford pensions? How much would 900 billion go towards infrastructure? I mean, and this is annually. I mean, FDC's accounts, as oil goes up, that 900 billion could actually increase. So you've got to, as Rufai just said a moment ago, cut your coats according to your size. The subsidy is just not sustainable.
Well, thank you, Rotes. Moving on now to more business updates. Michael Wilson joins us from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes, so most of the attention really on what the Fed said in its minutes yesterday. The bottom line is that they were still relatively dovish and still looking at inflation as being, as they put it, transitory. Now, whether you believe that or not, well, that's up to you. But that's what the central bank is saying. So therefore, as far as Asia Pacific is concerned, not a lot of activity, basically. A lot of markets actually sort of declined. Chinese stocks in Hong Kong down because there's this continuing feeling there's a lot more regulatory fears to resurface. Tencent, Alibaba, Meituan, and the rest of them down. Recently, as you know, Beijing announced a look into Chinese stocks which are listing in the United States, and that came after a recent crackdown on DIDI. Once again, getting all these worries about regulatory crackdowns up again. China, therefore, is quite a considerable amount actually. If you're looking at you look up at you look at the oversight that China actually has on China companies' listings in the United States, you're talking about quite a lot of companies. I'm just going to give you this figure just to play with, but it's roughly about $2 trillion worth of stocks that are actually held by companies in the United States listing in China. So that might be a big problem for investors. HSBC has been saying to investors in China, look through all the crackdowns and think about the growth in the companies themselves. So that's what they hope are going to be soothing words. China has a rival to Boeing and Airbus as far as single aisle medium distance jets are concerned. It's called the Comac C919. It's been in development for about 10 years. It's come out of the Chinese military, and the first delivery will take place at the end of this year to China Eastern Airlines. Staying with China and that DIDI stock, it's being sued by US investors who were saying that they weren't told that DIDI knew or did not know, but they weren't told that the Chinese were actually investigating DIDI and investigating ride-hailing and investigating listings. Thus, there was a fall in the share price, and thus US investors are very cross and they feel as though they should have been warned about it. So as far as the United States is concerned, generally speaking, a lot of interest in tech stocks, basically, yesterday. The contracts tied to the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ and the Dow not doing well. Investors bought into high-tech companies and came out of those kind of stocks which they revisited when they felt that there was a threat of higher interest rates and so on. Now growth stocks are back in vogue. It'll only last a few days, but it's where the market is absolutely right now. So Apple, Microsoft up about 1% in total and each. So the US, now to the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates and Melinda splitting up, as you know, a divorce happening between the two of them. They do have a backup in case it doesn't work. They're going to co-chair it. They're into a 2-year deal at the moment, but they will go individually to look after their charities after that. More noise from President Trump over yesterday, announcing he's suing Facebook, Twitter, and Google, as well as their respective CEOs. Shortly after all that, Trump's political aides started sending out fundraising letters to various people, trying to get some kind of underlining about what he was actually going. We're going to get more detail. We're coming over to Europe now. We're going to get more detail of the ECB review. Christine Lagarde, when she became chief executive there, when she took over in 2019, before the pandemic actually, or rather due to the pandemic, she's going to be releasing what the ECB feels it's going to do. So we'll be looking at these things quite closely around about lunchtime. Inflation, whether they're going to keep support going to the various economies and all the rest of it. So we'll get some idea about that. I was telling you about this UK chip plant. It's called it's in Newport in Wales, and it looks like there's going to be a security investigation into this. It eventually will be owned if the bid actually happens by Chinese Chinese owners, and the UK government is a little suspicious about all of that. Now, you were talking about oil. Here's the interesting twist on this. Yeah, the cartel problems are actually pushing oil prices slightly lower. We did talk about them rising yesterday, but what's sort of happening is that that people are just not sure about, most of all, the future of OPEC Plus. Now, that's actually quite considerable. Talked about it a little with the doctor yesterday, but this could be quite considerable as far as that's concerned. As far as gold is concerned, finally, getting a bit of a shine from the fact that yields are rising in the United States, so it's actually slightly more profitable and handy to hold gold, particularly if there are inflation worries. That's your global view this morning. Good morning.
Well, Michael, President Trump has taken a class action suit against Facebook, against Google, against the tech giants, and he's talking about his rights under the First Amendment. He says he's a victim of censorship. Will he succeed? That's the question. Is he struggling to be heard, having gone out of power, having become more or less powerless? But at the same time, Republicans in Congress are talking about Section 320, which provides some kind of liability protection for the tech giants. And they're saying they are going to take a look at it. They're going to go after the tech giants. Will they also succeed in that regard? And then finally, DIDI has been slammed with suits in 2 states of the United States for non-disclosure of his circumstances with regard to the CAC of China. How much damage would that do?
Let's start off with Trump. I mean, this is a political...
Section 230. Yeah, not 320. Section 230.
I think you're absolutely right to cast a cynical eye over President Trump. He still, of course, he was president. They still call him President Trump because that's the way of United States politics. Yes, of course, he is. He doesn't have a voice at the moment, so this is actually quite handy for him. And how curious that immediately fundraisers were sending out fundraising letters. It all adds to this rich mix, doesn't it, of the Republican mix too, within what's happening with. Of course, there are going to be problems about this. We know there are. The only people getting rich out of this long contracted process are going to be the lawyers. Same with Trump, same with the companies who are involved in high tech. As far as China and the United States is concerned, a bit of diplomacy wouldn't go far wrong. The detail of it, will get submerged eventually. We won't be bothering about this detail anymore. We'll be bothering about how Biden actually tackles China. That is the crucial question, and I think it's still down to diplomacy.
Well, thank you very much. Not enough time for you to comment on DIDI and how bad the circumstances could become, having lost about 20%, in terms of their stocks. Anyway, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. We'll take a short break now.
All right, welcome back to the Morning Show right here on the Rise News channel. We'll go for COVID-19 pandemic update now. Adesua Moro does an excellent job as always. Adesua, it's more than a joy to have you.
Good morning, guys. Such a heartbreaking story from school abductions in Nigeria. Unfortunately, I do not have cherry news either, as the world marked a grim milestone when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. 4 million deaths recorded in the last 24 hours. The total figure of the coronavirus deaths so far, almost 18 months after the virus made its way, across the world for the first time. More than 1.5 million of those deaths were recorded in 3 countries, the USA, Brazil, and India. Now, the world reached 3 million mark in April this year, and it has taken less than 3 months to reach the grim milestone of 4 million deaths. While deaths have started to decline in countries such as the United States, the toll is starting to pick up in lower and middle-income countries, with counts rising in the African region. Meanwhile, the WHO chief, Tedros Ghebreyesus, describes the latest death toll as an underestimate. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus was addressing a conference yesterday. It says it's an underestimate of the true numbers. He says the world is at a perilous time in this pandemic, with sharp spikes, fueled by highly transmissible variant and shocking inequality in access to vaccines. He's calling on governments around the world to be cautious in lifting COVID measures. Now, the great milestone of 4 million deaths comes on a day Southeast Asia's largest country, Indonesia, suffered its deadliest day of the pandemic. Indonesia recorded over 1,000 deaths in the last 24 hours. The country is battling a devastating coronavirus surge. Hospitals are beyond capacity, and desperate people are hunting for oxygen as hospitals are running out of them. Well, let's look at the statistics here in Nigeria. The country has recorded 3 figures of infections, 110 cases with no recorded related COVID-19 deaths. Lagos alone posted 88 of the new infections. It is not clear what is responsible for the increase we are seeing this week. The health authorities say the Delta variant, which is highly transmissible, has not yet been recorded in the country, but we are keeping a watch on those numbers. Moving on, almost 10,000 more people received the second dose of the vaccine across the country in the last 24 hours, according to this available data by the NPHCDA. There are reports that some centers here in Lagos claim to be out of vaccines already. And still in Nigeria, the Lagos State government, through its Ministry of Education, had to make a clarification on the closure of 2 private schools in the Lekki area of the state. Initial reports had suggested that the schools were ordered to be shut by the state government over COVID-19 scare. However, the statement credited to the Commissioner of Education for the state, Folashade Edefisayo, reveals the school proprietors on their own took the decision to preempt the likelihood of COVID-19 spread. Well, there's also been a statement from one of the schools involved. That statement, if you can have it back on the screen, the executive director of Standard Bearer School, Modupe Oni, says the decision to close in-person learning was in line with the guidelines laid out by the Lagos State Quality Assurance Department in their post-COVID protocols. Now, the statement reads in part that actually a family, a parent from the school, informed the management that they are taking their COVID-19 vaccines. However, they tested positive. A child from the house, asymptomatic, also tested positive, and so they informed the school. The other school involved in this story is the Lagoon Girls Secondary School, but they have not released a statement yet. Finally, this morning, let me tell you that New York has held a victory parade for its essential workers. The city is enjoying a low infection rate and a high vaccination rate. A truly, truly remarkable turnaround for the city that was once the epicenter of the pandemic crisis last year. Over 33,000 New York residents have died from COVID-19.
Let's start with the WHO Director General announcing the tragic milestone of more than 40 million deaths as a result of COVID in the last 15, 18 months. Well, the way to understand it is that this is more than the population of many countries of the world. It's more than the population of Namibia, of Equatorial Guinea, of Maldives, of Jamaica, of Bosnia-Herzegovina, of Uruguay, of Moldova, Georgia, Estonia, Eritrea. You know, these are countries of the world, even of Qatar, Namibia, Gambia. These are countries of 2.4 million, and then you have, you know, over 4 million people dying, more than the population of Guyana, of Cyprus, and many other countries. And then as a result of this pandemic, you know, all of these persons have died. But more important is the point made by Ghebreyesus about 1, the need for global solidarity. 2, about the need to move away from vaccine nationalism, which he identifies as a major problem. 3, about the need for vaccine equity. There are some countries of the world, including Indonesia that you referred to, the United States, and also the United Kingdom, who are even talking about a 3rd dose for their citizens, when people in vulnerable countries, developing countries, many of those countries that I have mentioned, have not even been able to give up to 1% of their population the very first dose. So I hope that people will listen to Ghebreyesus, Dr. Ghebreyesus, about the need for global solidarity. Indonesia, you mentioned Indonesia. Indonesia, 4th largest country in the world, population 276 million. The leadership has been very seriously criticized for not taking the COVID-19 pandemic seriously. And in the affected places, West Java, East Java, Bali, Jakarta, the concern is that, look, hospitalization rate is going up. Yesterday alone, the country recorded over 3,000 deaths and over 34,000, cases of infection. And the fear is that by next week, that could go up to about 70,000 cases, which is now a major embarrassment. But Australia is promising to provide the oxygen tanks. Indonesia is also saying that they will make the effort to provide oxygen tanks. They will curb movements, particularly in Bali and Java, East and West. But the issue that has been raised is one about leadership, about how the leadership in Indonesia has not been proactive enough. But one thing to take away from Indonesia is the fact that the major problem there again is the Delta variant.
Yes.
As is the case in Africa, in parts of Africa, in France, in South Korea, in South Africa, and also in the United Kingdom. And concerns about how to get the right kind of vaccine that will respond more effectively to the Delta variant. But the big takeaway for me is the criticism about the quality of leadership that has been provided, resulting in the spike in infection rates and fatalities in Indonesia. As for Lagos, yes, okay, it's good for the Lagos state government to clarify the situation and say it's those two schools that are taking preemptive measures. But what is the Lagos state government doing to make sure that the vaccines we have been promised will arrive, and efforts that they have also been making to ensure that the people who are partying and jollofing with reckless abandon across Lagos, are listening to government and are taking the necessary precautions, because this third wave that they talk about is real. They can tell us that the Delta variant is not yet in Nigeria, but this Delta variant that is going up and down all over the world, when it gets here, is that when we will start thinking about it.
And the Delta variant occurred just because Narendra Modi insisted that Kumbh Mela festival will go on as usual. I have to stress that we would not be having this discussion if he'd only done the decent thing, like what they did in Saudi. You have to sort of adapt the pilgrimages and religious festivals and what have you to the realities of the time. But I guess he thought, he knew better. It's good to see New York honoring the healthcare workers. You'll recall that the NHS was also awarded the George's Cross, weren't they? But for me, what's more important is pay rises. All these parades and honors are all very well and good, but I think people need to have a tangible reward, because now we should appreciate our healthcare workers if we ever failed to do so before.
Indeed.
And I think, just to piggyback on what Tunde said, I think it's obvious that the fight against COVID-19 will be determined by two things: politics and sense of leadership by our leaders. Like the case in India, Narendra Modi caused the Delta variant. And let me call it a name you don't want to hear: the Indian variant. Why? Because he felt if he allowed people to go for the Kumbh Mela festival, then they will vote BJP, his political party, in the elections at that point in time. So he wanted to use religion as a way to get the sentiments for political votes. And it was all about him and the leadership. And just like yesterday at the House of Parliament, that Stakia Sama raised concerns about this reopening. The data is out there, 100,000 cases per day and the likes and all of that. And Boris Johnson couldn't come with a reasonable solution to how they're going to nip it in the bud when those cases start to rise after the 19th of July. And Keir Starmer called it what it was. He said, we'll have something called the new Johnson variant, calling the name of Boris Johnson, Johnson variant of coronavirus. And that's why leadership in all of this matters. Yes. Leadership and politics, let's not play politics with the lives of people. Donald Trump did it, but in the end, he went to take the same vaccine he told people not to take in secret. Let's call a spade a spade. Let's be truthful to one another. Let's all fight this virus, and hopefully it outmutates itself and we can get our lives back. But the journey is still long. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.